So when I really think about how I got started as a writer, I go back to middle school. And my middle school had like all these ridiculous rules, like you could only go to your lockers between second and third period, and they like posted guards to stop you from going. They marched us in single file to the cafeteria for lunch. All candy was illegal in my middle school. I had a friend who would sell it on the black market out of a duffel bag out of his locker. He made like $200 in cash in 2 weeks. And the way that I coped with all of this is I started writing a story making fun of all of it. I made fun of my teachers, I made fun of the rules, and every day at school I would hand the story off to my friends. My friends would read it and they'd be like, write more, write more. And I loved that feeling of making people laugh. I loved the feeling of getting out my angst at this terrible situation. And I would write that story like every day. And then, actually in 8th grade, we had a creative writing assignment where we were supposed to write a short story. And I waited until the night before it was due. So I decided to turn in the story that I'd been writing. So the next day at school, everybody brings in their like little 2-page stories. And I bring in my like 12-page novel, like bam! And I got a D on that. And my teacher called my parents and they had a conference. And she was like, Don thinks it's funny to make fun of all the teachers here in the school. And I was like, I changed their names by at least 1 letter, so I don't know how you know who I'm talking about. The way I have thought about that now is I have had a long career making fun of middle school teachers in print. So I tell kids, whatever you got in trouble for in 8th grade, that could be your career. I think all throughout high school, I thought I was going to be a novelist. I wanted to write fantasy adventure novels with lots of dragons and magic. And I think if you look at my plays, you'll see that kind of nerdy influence throughout. And sometimes I would even I would go home from school and I would write my book instead of hanging out with my friends. And I would tell my friends, like, I gotta write. And I'd go home and I'd work. And they'd be like, what are you doing? And I never showed anyone those books because they were terrible. But I knew they were terrible. And I had an idea that the more I did it, the better I was gonna get. I started doing theater, I think my junior year in high school. I had this huge crush on this girl who was in the show. And I realized that there were not many boys involved in theater, and I figured, if I tried out for the show and I was amazing, she would love me. So I tried out for this really romantic play called The Crucible, and because I was a boy and I could speak, I was given a major role. And then after that, I kind of just fell in love with acting, and I acted in every show I could do in high school, but I never thought about playwriting actually when I was in high school. We had this thing where every Friday night, it was called Chelsea 1117. And every Friday night, all of the theater people would get together without the directors, without the professors, at 11:17 p.m. in the small theater, and we would perform shows in front of an audience that nobody had seen or rehearsed. So kind of like a 24-hour play festival thing, but the week before you would get 3 ingredients, and people would write plays, and they would show up with scripts. And they would hand them out to people, and you would do it in front of an audience. And sometimes it was a total train wreck, as you can imagine, and sometimes it was really, really fun. And I acted in a whole bunch of those. And then finally I decided to write my very first play. This was January of 1994. And it was performed in front of an audience, and the first reaction to any play I ever wrote was when it was over, somebody in the audience stood up and they turned around and they pointed at me and they said, "You're going to hell." And I loved that. And I was like, yes, I want to be a playwright now. And so what happened is I would essentially write plays every week for this thing. And I got to see my work in front of an audience again and again and again. I probably did 30 plays in college this way, 5-minute, 10-minute shows. So I learned how to write quickly, and I really got the experience of seeing what worked in front of an audience and seeing what didn't, which came in so handy later. I did want to be a playwright. I went to New York to get a master's degree in playwriting from the Actor Studio program. I chose a graduate program that did not separate the playwrights and actors. So I had to do the same acting training that all of the actors were doing. And that was voice lessons, that was movement, scene study, all of the things that the actors were doing, the playwrights were doing. I learned about the method. I had great acting teachers there. And so I trained both as an actor and as a playwright. And I was an actor before I was ever a playwright. So when I write plays, I am really writing for the performer. I'm writing for the actor. I want to create roles that are fun for kids to do, but also meaty and interesting and challenging for actors. I always kind of had twin ambitions in life. I wanted to be a writer, but I also really wanted to be a teacher. And I wanted to be a teacher pretty much from ever seeing Dead Poets Society. I thought that was what I wanted to have kids standing on desks declaring their love for me. And so I ended up teaching at a boarding school for 2 years too. But I always thought that after I got my master's degree in playwriting, that teaching was going to be the next logical step for at least a day job. So I taught English for a few years, and then I ended up moving to Texas and teaching both high school and middle school theater. I never set out to write for young people, like that was not my goal. But I was thinking of myself, in the Sam Shepard, Stephen Adly Gurgis, Eugene O'Neill kind of tortured, miserable people living in, ditches. That's the kind of plays that I wanted to write. Not to categorize both of those people like that, but they have a few plays like that. But those were the plays that I was interested in writing. And I never thought about writing for young people until I actually found myself teaching middle school theater just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. And I discovered that I hated everything that was aimed at middle school kids. And I think that to distill it down to the thing that I hated the most about it was that those plays felt very untruthful to me. They were cheesy, they insulted my kids' intelligence, but mostly they were just disingenuous. And I wanted to write plays. I wanted to do theater that was about truth. That's what I learned about in grad school, and that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I couldn't find that was aimed at 13-year-olds. This is the first play that I was going to do with my middle school kids. And I looked long and hard to try and find a show that was interesting, that was funny, that didn't have a whole lot of adult situations or language in it. But my kids were gonna stage a walkout, and they didn't want to do the show. And I asked them what the problem was, and they said, oh, it's the language. I'm like, what's wrong with the language? And they're like, it's old-fashioned. And so I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to just go home and rewrite this in modern language and bring it back in? And they were like, yes. So I did that, and I made it sort of ridiculous and crazy, and I made it my own thing, and my kids loved it, and we performed it. So I thought, that was really fun, and that was really fulfilling artistically, surprisingly so, that I didn't expect that. And it was really, I think, wonderful for me as a teacher to share that side of myself, that sort of goofy, funny side, but also this artistic side that I had cultivated. So after that, I basically wrote every play for my middle school students that we did from then on. It also helped that I was scared of the school secretary, and I was afraid to ask for money for my budget. I had an actual budget for my show. I never asked for $1 because I was terrified to walk in there. So every show we did was on zero budget. So me writing the script helped save money that way. That skill I learned in college about writing really fast came in super handy because I would write the plays. As soon as we were done with one play, I would write the next play, and I would better bring that script in, or otherwise, I'd have to teach class. So we would basically go in a repertory theater of play to play to play. At some point, I realized I was living the playwright's dream, which was I had a 600-seat theater under my control. I had a repertory company of actors I didn't need to pay. We were doing my shows back to back, and an audience was gonna show up. And I was like, what else could a playwright ever want? inevitably, the parts that I would write would start to, it was, like writing for a repertory company of actors. I would write for my comedic person. I would write for my dramatic person. And, it just so happened they were 7th graders, so here I am, creating roles for them. They didn't know I was creating the roles for them, but I was. The Brothers Grimm Spectaculathon, for instance, the end of that play is all about one kid doing all of Cinderella, and he does like 20 minutes of Cinderella, like one kid running back and forth across the stage with different wigs. And I wrote that specifically for a student of mine because he could do voices and he was really funny. And I wanted to go to competition and have him win Best Actor. That was my plan. And I thought if I wrote the most ridiculous, impossible role for this kid, he will go home with the trophy. So that entire part of the show was because of my student. And I think it's one of the favorite parts of the play. I think it's the funniest part of the show. That kid did, of course, win Best Actor because of his performance, but also because I had given him this incredibly insane challenge to try and do. I was trying to figure it out, like how many people have actually been in my shows, and I think the number's like 500,000. Yeah, I think that's because it's about 20 parts per production. There's 25,000 of those, so yeah, I think it's probably 500,000 people have done it on my show. My next play, I just came up with a title. My title was Bobby Wilson Can Eat His Own Face, and I decided to write a play around that. I wrote a play that had a singing tapeworm come on stage named Squirmy, who sang songs about food safety. And every show, I was so free to just make the most ridiculous, crazy things I could think of. It really freed up every creative cell in my body. And I think that's a lot of what the kids really loved about it, that these plays were so wild and unpredictable, and you never knew what was going to happen on stage, and that gave them this kind of energy that everybody loved. Early on, my first year of having published plays, I got this big map of the United States, and I got a whole bunch of push pins. And I would put a push pin in the map for every time one of my shows was done. And the first year, there were 50 pins. And then the second year, I had to get more colors because I published a bunch more shows. And I started not being able to keep up with the map anymore. And I gave up the map at about year 3, when I had about 300 productions of my shows. So here we are at 50,000 performances, and they've been, I think, 81 countries in the world now, all over the world. It's mind-boggling. I don't know how to explain it other than just like, it's really cool. I'm glad that what I'm doing resonates with people, and I think it's about the faith that people are kind of the same wherever you are. Especially theater people are kind of the same, even though we're quirky, wonderful, strange people. All around the world, we're quirky, wonderful, strange people. And so I was writing plays that appealed to the 13-year-old in me. And I had faith that they were going to appeal to the 13-year-old somewhere else. And I think they have, and it's really amazing. I saw a picture once of a show of mine that was done in Singapore. And it was a shot not of the actors, which you normally see. It was a shot of the audience. And so for all these people in Singapore, laughing, they're all laughing. And just to see, people from a different culture reacting to something that you wrote, it's pretty amazing to think about that, there's people around the world, not just performing them, but enjoying them. It's humbling. I love it, but it's kind of amazing. Each time I set out, I try and do something different. I hope to. And I'm trying to challenge myself and grow as a playwright. And each process for each play sometimes necessitates being a little bit different. If it's a murder mystery, then I need to have a very intricate plot, and I have to have an outline, and I have to have every moment scripted so that I know what's going to happen. For the most part, for the fun, short plays, I try to write really quickly. Because I write quickly, it's not as pre-thought out. And I think that allows there to be surprises, that allows there to be spontaneity in the writing, and I follow where that goes. And sometimes that goes to dead ends, but sometimes that leads to really fruitful, interesting places. Mostly when I'm writing, I'm trying to crack myself up, and so I'm trying to make myself laugh. So sometimes it's almost like an improv thing where I'm trying to come up with it in the moment. I haven't overly scripted it. I haven't overly thought it out. I allow it to be fresh. I allow it to happen quickly. And I don't over edit it either. I allow it to have, maybe the plays have a little warts in them sometimes. Sometimes there are things that don't make a ton of sense that are in the play. And I feel like those kind of make the plays better. They make them more interesting and they make them more unique. So the 10 Ways to Survive the Zombie Apocalypse was pretty funny because I had a teacher write on my Facebook page. She said, if you write a play about the zombie apocalypse, I'd die of happiness. And I remember thinking like, oh, zombies are so cliche. They're gonna be gone in like a year. I don't wanna do this. Everybody else is writing about zombies. I don't wanna do it. And then I found out, and this was just like a random thing I saw online, the CDC had done a zombie day for like their workers. So they had spent like $1 million just to do a fun, team building exercise for the CDC about zombie outbreak. And I remember being kind of upset by that. I'm thinking like, you just spent $1 million of taxpayer money on the zombie outbreak. The other thing that this play came from, and it's very interesting because you never know where your inspiration is going to come from, and you never know when you're going to use something. So I was teaching middle school, and I was teaching in a portable building with like cardboard for walls, basically. I shared a wall with another teacher who was doing public speaking. And I was in my prep period, I was at my computer, and I heard a kid giving a speech about how to survive the zombie apocalypse. And I stopped for a second. I was like, this is what we're doing in school. And he was talking about how you don't want a handgun, you want a shotgun because you have to blow the zombies' brains out. And now I didn't use that until maybe 5 years later was when I actually wrote this play, and I kind of went back to that moment. So anyway, the CDC and this kid's speech sort of sparked this thing in me where I was kind of upset. Sometimes the plays come from when you're angry about things. So I was a little upset. So that's where 10 Ways to Survive the Zombie Apocalypse came from. I wanted to be a novelist first, so that never really went away. Starting in about 2013 or so, I started writing novels. And I wasn't selling them. They didn't sell. I wrote 4, and none of them sold. And finally, I wrote this novel of 7 Torments of Amy and Craig, which is really, near and dear to my heart. And that novel sold and was translated into 8 languages, and all of that happened with it. The difference in writing a novel and a play is in the visualization. I think writing a novel is much more like writing a screenplay. You are visualizing the moments. You are trying to see what the characters look like. You are trying to know what you're trying to put a picture in the reader's mind. In a play, you trust that all of that is going to be taken care of by other people. I hear a play. I don't see it usually. I don't see what the characters look like usually, because I know there's going to be different actors in those roles. So a novel exercises a different part of my brain where it's the visualization part of it, and takes an entirely different skill set, which I love because it stretches me as a writer, and then I can bring those things back to doing things in plays. You have some of these classic plays of mine that get done over and over and over, and they're, they're in the top 10 list every year. And they're fun and they're really good, but I do think what I'm writing now is better. I think technically it's better. I think as far as the sense of humor, I try to remain just as crazy and wacky as I've ever been. I think their plays are a little less mean than they used to be. I think oftentimes early in my career, I leaned on that sort of characters being mean to each other as the root of the humor. And I don't do that anymore, just because of the sensitivity of kids and trying to learn about that over the years. I think the plots are more complicated now. I think I still try to write with this sense of theatricality and fun and spontaneity, but I also try to really just be sensitive to all kinds of people who are performing the shows. You know, if I think about like, oh, okay, this play is gonna get performed in Qatar, right? Like, okay, well, I have to make sure that it's cool for, you know, the people in Mongolia to do this show. You know, like, so you're kind of writing for the world in a way. There's a risk there to make things general. And I think that I try to go the other way and just make things really, really specific. I was talking about the 10 ways to survive the zombie apocalypse, right? So the first way to survive the zombie apocalypse is to sacrifice the weak, right? Which is, you have this cliche trope of somebody trips and they sprain their ankle and they say, you know, leave me, save yourselves. And the truth of that situation is someone's gonna be like, yes, thank you. And they're gonna go, right? And the trope that we always see is, I'm not leaving you, you know, and they go to grab them and drag them off. So the humor from that moment in the play is the person trips and they're like, leave me, like, go save yourself. And the other person's like, thanks, right? And they go, and you get a big laugh. And you get a big laugh because it's a truthful moment in a ridiculous situation, right? And I think that's where a lot of my humor comes from, where you strip the artifice and the, you know, the sentimentality out of things sometimes, and you get to sort of the bare bones of it. I think that's why my work can come across as dark sometimes, but I think it's honest. I think that's what is important to me as a writer. I think every drama I ever write is usually pretty funny at some points, and I hope that, I don't know if this is entirely true, but most of my comedies have moments of seriousness in them as well. I think it's really important that something is not wholly one thing or another, because that's how we deal with tragedy in life, through humor. That's how we deal with anxiety, with difficult situations. There's always moments of humor in our lives. So I try to find those. And again, I'm trying to find an honest moment with the character and to just get to that moment of truth. And that is often funny. And it's often a character trying to make another character laugh. And I think that's, you know, that's how we interact with each other. That's what feels real. I think that, and this took me a little bit to realize, is that who was my audience for my plays and who was the most important person to me in the play. And the most important person for me is the performer, the actor, who would have been my students when I was directing them. That was my responsibility, right? To make sure that those kids have a great experience being in the show. So whether or not the show itself is amazing or whatever, or what reaction you get from the audience, is secondary to me to what is the experience of the kids on stage and what is the experience they have, because that's what I was getting paid to do. I was paid to teach those kids. So they were my principal responsibility. So when I would write a play, and if it had 27 parts in it, I made sure that those 27 parts were great parts, that they were fun for everybody. Every kid that came to that rehearsal wanted to be there and was gonna have a good time and was gonna have a moment to shine. Not every role is the same size. You know, your role might have 4 lines, but if your role had 4 lines, I wanted them to have an amazing moment, you know, have a lot of personality. I wanted Spear Carrier 2 to be a great part. So focusing on those student performers, I think, is another reason that the plays have done so well, because kids really want to be in them. And I think what happens is that the kids have so much fun on stage that the audience has fun watching them. So the audience has a great time watching the play, but my focus is on those kids on stage rather than, you know, the play itself or the audience I think that's also why I'm usually amenable to if somebody has needs to change a line for a community or something like that. I'm usually pretty amenable to that because for me, the most important experience is those kids on stage.